Betrayed by the Council. Earth's war fleet emerged. Total annihilation unleashed. Part 1. The Accord that was never honored. Admiral Junho walked into the Galactic Council's grand chamber, like he had done many times before. His boots clicked on the smooth stone floor. His dark uniform had no wrinkles, no loose buttons, no signs of carelessness. He was a man who believed in order. He believed in agreements. He believed that when two sides shook hands across a table, those hands meant something. He had been wrong. The chamber was enormous. It sat at the heart of the Verath capital station, a space structure so large it had its own gravity systems, its own weather zones, its own internal oceans. Thousands of delegates from dozens of alien species filled the circular rows of seats that spiraled upward like a great stone bowl turned toward the stars. Lights floated near the ceiling. Translators buzzed in every ear. The smell of a dozen different atmospheres mixed together in a way that no human ever fully got used to. Junho took his seat at the human delegation table. Beside him sat his aide, a young woman named Rena, who kept her eyes on her datapad and said very little. She never said much in these rooms. She preferred to listen. At the center of the chamber stood Counselor Dara of the Velmari people. She was tall, thin, with pale blue skin, and eyes that reflected light in odd ways, like mirrors set at strange angles. She smiled often. Too often, Junho had always thought. A smile that never quite reached those strange eyes. Today she was giving a speech about cooperation. The Verath Accord has held for 40 years, Dara said, her voice flowing through the translation systems into every language at once. 40 years of peace. 40 years of shared progress. We gather today to celebrate that achievement and to renew our commitment to the principles that have guided us. The chamber applauded. Many species clapped, clicked, or hummed in their own ways. Junho did not move. He had read the Accord when he was a young officer, barely old enough to understand what it meant. He had studied every line of it. Earth had agreed to reduce its orbital defense platforms from over 300 to 40. Earth had agreed to pull back its deep space patrol routes to within a set boundary. Earth had agreed to reduce the total tonnage of its active warship fleet by 70%. All of it verified, all of it documented, all of it done. In return, the Council had promised Earth a protected seat at every major decision table, a guaranteed vote, protection against economic blockades, recognition of every human colony as sovereign territory under galactic law. Earth had kept every single promise. The Council had kept almost none. Over the years, human colonies on the Outer Rim had been quietly pushed off trade routes. Human ships had been stopped and searched without legal cause, their cargo taken, their crews delayed for weeks in holding stations. 3 human colony worlds had been denied the infrastructure support they were entitled to under the Accord. When Earth raised these issues at Council sessions, the responses were polite, calm, and completely empty. Review committees were formed. Reports were filed. Nothing changed. Junho had filed 47 formal complaints in the last 12 years alone. He had responses to 22 of them. None of the responses had done anything. Still, he had believed in the process. He had believed that systems, even flawed systems, could be corrected through patience and pressure. His superiors back on Earth had told him the same thing. Work within the rules. Stay calm. Stay visible. Keep talking. He was very tired of talking. Dara finished her speech, and the applause filled the chamber again. Then the session moved into its formal agenda. Trade agreements, boundary discussions, resolutions about resource rights in the outer bands. Junho sat through all of it, listening, taking notes, passing questions through the proper channels. It was during a recess break, when most delegates had stepped away from their seats to take refreshments in the side halls, that Rena leaned close to him. She kept her eyes on her datapad, Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It came through," she said. Jun-ho did not react. He picked up his own datapad and looked at it as if reviewing ordinary notes. "When?" he asked. 6 hours ago. The signal was delayed through 3 relay points to avoid detection. Our contact inside the Velmari administrative office confirmed it personally before going dark. Jun-ho read the message on his screen. It was short. It was clear. It was the single worst thing he had read in his life, and he had read battlefield casualty reports from 3 wars. The council had voted. Not in open session, in a private chamber, with no human representatives present. No record entered into the official logs, no announcement of any kind. 11 of the 14 council species had signed a document called the Varith Partition Agreement. Under this document, Earth's 12 outer colonies were to be redistributed among 5 council species over the next 4 years. Earth's homeworld would remain technically independent, but its trade access, resource rights, and defense boundaries would all fall under council management. Humanity would be reclassified from a full member species to a protected ward species. A ward. Like something that needed to be looked after, because it could not manage itself. Jun-ho set the datapad down very gently on the table. He thought about the 40 years. He thought about the platforms they had dismantled, the patrols they had pulled back, the warships they had decommissioned in good faith, while cameras recorded everything, and council inspectors signed off on the paperwork. He thought about the colonies, about the people on those worlds who had built their lives on the understanding that they were protected, that the accord meant something, that the handshake across the table had been real. He thought about all the complaints he had filed, all the meetings he had sat through, all the speeches he had listened to, from people like Dara, who smiled with their mouths and planned with something else entirely. Delegates began returning to their seats. Dara walked back to the center floor, smoothing her robes, exchanging quiet pleasantries with other counselors. She glanced toward the human delegation table and gave Jun-ho a small nod. Polite, professional. Jun-ho stood up. He buttoned the top button of his uniform coat, which he rarely did except in formal situations. He picked up his datapad. He looked at Rena, who was already standing, her face completely calm, her bag already on her shoulder, as if she had known this moment was coming long before today. He walked away from the table, through the chamber, past the floating lights, past the delegates who turned to watch with confused expressions, past the guards at the main door who called after him but did not stop him because no one had given them orders for this specific situation. Out into the corridor, down to the shuttle bay, into the small Earth diplomatic vessel that had brought them here. He sat in the pilot seat and opened a channel, not to the council, not to any official frequency, to a woman on the other side of the solar system who had been waiting for exactly this call. "Commander Rena," he said quietly, "wake them up." On the other end of the channel there was a brief pause. Then a voice, calm and steady. "Yes, Admiral, the yards are ready." Jun-ho closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them and began plotting a course away from Verath Station. Behind him, in the Grand Chamber, Counselor Dara was beginning the next session. She had no idea that the age she had built was already ending. H1, betrayed by the Council, Earth's war fleet emerged, total annihilation unleashed. H2, Part 2, Ghost Yards and Sleeping Giants. HR. Europa had always looked quiet from above. That was the point. The moon of Jupiter sat in the dark like a cracked white egg, its surface covered in long lines of ancient ice, its oceans hidden deep underneath. Council survey ships had passed over it dozens of times. Their scans had shown nothing unusual, some geological activity, some trace heat signatures attributed to tidal forces, no artificial structures of any significance. What they had not detected, and what humanity had spent 19 years making sure they never would detect, was the facility buried 4 kilometers beneath the ice. Commander Rena was standing in the main operations room of Europa Station, when the call came from Admiral Junho. The room was long and low, carved directly from the rock beneath the ice shelf. Every surface was either dark metal or bare stone. The lighting was dim on purpose. Bright lights created heat, and heat could be detected. Everything here had been built with one goal in mind: stay invisible for as long as necessary. She had been waiting for this call for a long time. "Wake them up," Juno had said. Rena turned to the room full of engineers, technicians, and officers, who had all stopped what they were doing the moment Juno's channel opened. They were looking at her. Some of them had been working in the ghost yards for over a decade. Some of them had never seen their families for years at a stretch, because the work here could not be interrupted, and the secrecy could not be risked. "You all heard him," Rena said. "Full activation. All stations, all yards. Begin pre-launch sequencing across the board." The room erupted into quiet, controlled motion. Rena walked to the window at the far end of the operations room. It was a reinforced viewport that looked down into the main cavern below, a space so large that it had its own atmosphere management system. And filling that cavern, in rows that stretched further than the eye could comfortably follow, were warships. Not small ones. The largest was a Ragnarok-class carrier called the EWS Unyielding. It was nearly 4 kilometers long. Its hull was the color of deep space, not painted, but treated with a material that absorbed most scan frequencies. Its weapons bays were sealed, its engines cold, its crew already boarding through the access corridors that ran along the cavern walls. It looked, in the low light of the cavern, like something that the dark between stars had grown all on its own. There were over 300 ships in the Europa facility alone, and Europa was only one of the ghost yards. Tesu was in the engine bay of the Unyielding when the activation order reached him. He was a small man who spoke rarely and worked constantly. His hands were never clean. He had designed the revised FTL drive cores that were installed in every ship in the ghost yards, and he treated those engines the way some people treated family members, with attention, with worry, with a kind of love that was hard to explain to anyone who had not built something with their own hands over years and years. The new drive cores were, by any honest measurement, extraordinary. Standard Council FTL drives were efficient and well-tested, built for reliability across a wide range of ship types. Tesu's cores were not standard. He had spent 11 years finding ways to reduce the transition lag, the delay between when a ship engaged its FTL drive and when it actually reached speed. Standard Council ships had a lag of about 40 seconds, long enough, in a battle, for a great many things to go wrong. Tesu's cores had a lag of 6 seconds. He had also improved the peak velocity, the recharge time between jumps, and the accuracy of exit coordinates. The result was a fleet that could move faster, arrive more precisely, and jump again more quickly than anything the Council had ever put in space. He ran one final check on the drive core sequence and spoke into his comm unit. "Engine bay is green. We're ready." Across the cavern, the lights in the Unyielding's hull began to come on one section at a time, like something enormous, slowly opening its eyes. In the weapons division, Hana was doing her own checks with a great deal more calm than the situation seemed to call for. She was the kind of person who became more relaxed the more serious things got, which her colleagues had always found either reassuring or deeply unsettling, depending on how well they knew her. She had developed the collapsed torpedo over 8 years of research, failed tests, and one incident that had removed an entire section of the Titan test range from existence, in a way that still made the senior engineers uncomfortable to discuss. The collapsed torpedo did not destroy its target in the traditional sense. A conventional weapon released energy. It created heat, pressure, and shock waves. It tore things apart. The collapsed torpedo did something different. It used a localized fold in spacetime. Very small, very brief, very violent, to remove the target from its current position in the physical universe. There was no explosion, no shockwave, no debris field. The target was simply there, and then it was not. The first time they had tested it on an unmanned frigate-sized target, the silence afterward had been so complete that half the observation team had thought the torpedo had failed. Then someone had pointed out that the target was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Hana had 48 collapsed torpedo launchers across the fleet. Each launcher held 12 torpedoes. The mathematics of that were not complicated. She signed off on the final weapons inventory and moved to her station on the Unyielding's tactical deck. The other ghost yards were also waking up. On Titan, a facility built into a canyon system that had been deliberately hidden under decades of engineered methane fog, was coming alive. 16 ships were powering up there, including 3 destroyer-class vessels that Rena had kept specifically in reserve for situations requiring speed over firepower. In the asteroid belt, in a hollowed-out rock that had been cataloged in Council records as an inactive mining site, 14 more ships were preparing to launch. There were smaller facilities at 4 other locations across the outer solar system. All of them had been built in pieces over years, using supply chains that were deliberately fragmented so that no single contractor, no single delivery route, no single inspection team could ever see the full picture. The people who had designed the secrecy had studied history, specifically the history of every plan that had ever been discovered before it was ready, and had built their concealment around every lesson those failures had left behind. By the time Rena's full activation order had finished propagating through all the secure channels, 312 warships were in various stages of powering up across 7 locations. Their crews, men and women who had trained in classified facilities, who had signed agreements that made ordinary military secrecy look casual, who had in many cases not told their own families what they actually did for work, were at their stations. Rena stood at the viewport and watched the Unyielding come fully to life below her. She thought about the moment, 18 years ago, when a very quiet meeting had taken place in a room with no recording devices, attended by 8 people who had all come to the same conclusion at roughly the same time. The conclusion was simple. The Council was not going to honor the Accord. Not because they were incapable of it, but because they had decided that humanity, disarmed and cooperative, was easier to manage than humanity with its full military capability intact. The meeting had lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, the Ghost Yards program had been authorized. Not to prepare for war, to prepare for the moment when war was chosen for them. Rena pressed her comm. All stations, this is Commander Rena. Full pre-launch sequence is confirmed. We are go for emergence on Admiral Judho's signal. Crews are to be at combat readiness within 90 minutes. She paused. You all know why we built these ships. You all know what was done to the people who trusted the process and got a knife for it. Today, the knife goes back. She released the comm. Below her, in the vast cold cavern under Europa's ice, 300 warships waited in the dark. They would not be waiting much longer. Betrayed by the Council, Earth's warfleet emerged. Total annihilation unleashed. Part 3. The fleet emerges. The Council's long-range surveillance network was considered one of the finest early warning systems in the known galaxy. It covered over 40 star systems. It had thousands of sensor nodes placed at key transit points, boundary zones, and strategic choke points. It could detect a single frigate-class vessel making an unauthorized FTL jump from 3 systems away. It had been designed, over centuries, to give the Council time. Time to respond, time to position, time to coordinate. Time was a weapon, and the surveillance network was how the Council kept it. In the 97-year history of that network, it had never registered a complete failure, until the morning that 312 human warships appeared in the Verith capital cluster simultaneously. The sensor stations at the cluster's edge detected the FTL signature of the first jump, flagged it as an anomaly, and began running their standard identification sequence. Before that sequence could finish, the second wave of ships arrived. Then the third. Then all the rest, in a coordinated emergence pattern so tight that the arrival windows between individual ships were measured in fractions of a second. The sensor network, built for tracking small groups of ships over large distances, tried to process what it was seeing, and failed. Alarms triggered across 14 monitoring stations. Operators stared at readouts that made no mathematical sense. One station supervisor reportedly looked at his screen, looked at his second operator, and asked if the system was running some kind of diagnostic simulation. It was not. The EAWS Unyielding came out of FTL at the center of the formation, its 4-kilometer hull settling into position with the kind of steadiness that only came from a drive core that had been refined over a decade by someone who did not accept imprecision. Around it, in a crescent formation that stretched across nearly 200,000 kilometers of space, the rest of the fleet took shape. Destroyer groups on the outer edges, carrier wings in the second line, heavy assault ships in the third, and at the very front, running silent with all external lights off, 12 scout vessels that had already mapped every Council defense position in the cluster during their advanced recon runs 6 hours earlier. Admiral Junho stood at the command bridge of the Unyielding and looked at the tactical display. Every ship was in position. Every ship had reported in. Not one had failed to arrive. Not one had dropped out of formation during transit. 312 ships, ready, waiting. Captain Bora stood at the navigation station to his left. She was not a large woman, but she had the quality that the best military officers sometimes had, the quality of making the space around her seem smaller. Not because she was loud, but because her attention made everything sharper. She had been part of the Ghost Yards program for 9 years. She had taken the Unyielding's crew through 6 full combat readiness cycles in the past year alone. "Formation is confirmed, Admiral," she said. "All wings check in. Strike groups are holding position." "Tactical," Junho said. Ki Young looked up from his station. He was younger than most of the senior crew, with the kind of precise manner that made him seem older than he was. He had been Rena's recommendation for the tactical officer role, and Rena's recommendations were never wrong. "Council Defense Fleet is moving," Ki Young said. "They're scrambling. I'm reading 41 warships coming out of docking positions around the station. Another 23 moving in from the outer patrol routes. They're trying to form a blocking line between us and the capital station." "How long before they complete the line?" "At current speed, 14 minutes. Junho looked at the display for a moment. 64 ships, against 312. Plus whatever they could call in from neighboring systems, which would take time they did not have. "How many people are on that station?" Bora asked quietly, not to anyone in particular. "Civilian population is estimated at 400,000, Ki Young said. "Primarily diplomatic personnel, administrative staff, and their families. The station is not a military target." "We are not here to hurt civilians," Junho said. He said it clearly, loud enough for the full bridge crew to hear. "The Council made a political and military decision. We are answering that decision, nothing else." He opened a single channel, not encrypted, not coded, a standard open frequency that every ship, every station, and every Council delegate in the cluster could receive. He did not give a long speech. He was not a man who believed in long speeches at moments like this one. "This is Admiral Junho of the Earth-Allied War Fleet. You voted on our future, without us in the room. You signed our partition without asking if we agreed. You spent 40 years watching us keep promises that you had already decided not to keep yourselves." He paused for exactly 1 second. "You miscalculated our restraint." He closed the channel. On Verith Station, Counselor Dara had been pulled from her chambers by her security team the moment the first alarms triggered. She was standing in the station's command center now, watching the tactical display, watching 300 human warships hold their formation in a crescent that could swallow her entire defense fleet without slowing down. She had known about the ghost yards, not specifically, not the locations, not the scale, but she had known that some level of unauthorized construction was possible. She had factored it into the Council's planning. She had expected, at most, a few dozen ships. A show of defiance that could be managed. Not this. She stared at the scale of what was on the display, and for the first time in 20 years of political maneuvering, she had absolutely no words. "Open a channel to their admiral," she said. Her aide tried. The channel remained closed on Junho's end. Meanwhile, Siwon was already moving. He flew one of the 12 scout ships at the front of the formation, a light attack vessel built for speed and electronic interference. His job was not to fight yet. His job was to make sure the Council's defense fleet couldn't talk to each other properly. His ship carried a suite of communication disruption systems that he had spent 3 years learning to use, with the kind of casual precision that looked effortless and absolutely was not. He moved through the space between the two fleets at low speed, threading careful paths between the Council's advancing warships, painting their communication frequencies with soft interference that would make coordination just slightly harder, just slightly slower. Not enough to be obvious, enough to matter. "How are we looking?" Bora asked over the internal channel. "Their left wing is already out of sync with their center," Siwon replied. "They're going to have a gap in about 4 minutes if nobody tells them to tighten up." "Will someone tell them?" "Not if I can help it," he said. Back on the bridge of the Unyielding, Junho watched the Council fleet try to complete its formation. Some of them were genuinely modern vessels, well-armed and crewed by people who were not at fault for the decisions their politicians had made. He did not enjoy what was about to happen to them. But he had not started this. "Captain Bora," he said. "Admiral, prepare the vanguard for advance. Target their formation gaps. Minimal collateral contact where possible." He looked at the display one more time. "Tell Commander Rena the door is open." Bora nodded and turned to her station. In the tactical screens, the crescent formation of Earth's warfleet began to move. For the first time in 40 years, humanity was not asking for anything. Betrayed by the Council, Earth's warfleet emerged. Total Annihilation Unleashed. Part 4. Total Annihilation Unleashed. The battle did not begin slowly. There was no cautious probing, no gradual escalation, no exchange of warning shots. The moment Captain Bora gave the advance order, the Earth fleet moved with the kind of coordinated speed that came from 9 years of drilling the same maneuvers until they no longer required thought. The crescent formation split into 3 distinct hammer groups, each one assigned a section of the Council's defensive line, each one moving toward its target with a different angle and a different timing, so that the defenders could not focus on any single threat without exposing themselves to another. Bora ran the vanguard personally. Her group was the first hammer, 28 ships, a mix of heavy destroyers and mid-class assault vessels, aimed directly at the center of the Council's blocking formation. The Council's ships tried to concentrate fire on the incoming group, but Siwon's communication interference had already done its work. The left wing of the Council fleet was still slightly out of position, still trying to close the gap that had opened during their scramble formation, still receiving orders half a second too late to act on them properly. In a battle, half a second is an enormous amount of time. Bora's group hit the Council center at an angle, forcing the front ships to break formation to avoid collisions, and the careful line the Council had tried to build came apart in less than 4 minutes. Not destroyed, broken, scattered. Individual ships making individual decisions instead of acting as a coordinated unit. Individual ships were much easier to deal with. From the EAWS Unbroken Dawn, Commander Rena watched the tactical feed and spoke into her command channel with the steady rhythm of someone reading a list she had written herself. Second hammer. Adjust heading 3 degrees. Target the Council's right cluster. Third hammer. Hold position for another 40 seconds. Let their rear units commit before moving. Scout wing. Push their communications interference further back. Keep their reinforcement signals muddy. She had planned this engagement for years. Not this specific battle. She had not known exactly when or where it would happen. But she had planned the type of engagement, the flow of it, the way an outnumbered opponent would respond to a faster and heavier force, the specific mistakes they would make when their formation broke and their communication failed. She had played it through hundreds of times in simulation. She knew all the points where things could go wrong, and she had built responses into the plan for all of them. So far, nothing had gone wrong. Hana was watching her targeting display with the same calm expression she always wore. The collapsed torpedoes were not cheap to produce and not fast to reload, which meant she did not fire them randomly. She watched the battle the way a careful hunter watches a field, waiting for the right moment, the right target, the right configuration. A cluster of 3 Council destroyers that had broken away from the main formation and were trying to regroup on the fleet's left side. A Council carrier that was attempting to launch its fighter wing. 2 fast attack ships racing toward the unyielding in a coordinated strike run. She fired 11 torpedoes over the course of 30 minutes. Where each one hit, something that had been there stopped being there. The 3 destroyers, gone. Not exploding, not breaking apart, not spinning off damaged into space. Just gone, as if the coordinates they had occupied had decided to stop containing them. The carrier lost its forward section and most of its fighter bay before its commander got the retreat order out. The 2 fast attack ships vanished mid-run, which caused a visible disruption in the Council fleet's behavior. Ships that had been pushing forward began to slow. Some of them stopped entirely. There is a specific kind of fear that comes from watching something disappear, not from watching it burn or break or crack apart. Those things are violent and terrible, but they are familiar. Disappearing is different. Disappearing says that the rules are not what you thought they were, that the person firing at you has access to something that does not fit inside any framework you prepared for. The Council fleet had not prepared for this framework. Ki-young was tracking every ship in the engagement simultaneously, flagging vessels that attempted to retreat, passing coordinates to the pursuit wings, keeping Junho updated on the flow of the battle in clear, short sentences that required no interpretation. He had also been tracking a second thing, the communication signals going in and out of Verath Station. Not the military channels, the diplomatic ones, the ones connecting the Council's member species to their home governments. Admiral, he said, heavy signal traffic from the station. They're requesting military support from Velmari Home System, from the Keth Confederation, and from 3 other Council members. Estimated response time for any reinforcements is between 6 and 9 hours. How are we doing on time? At current engagement pace, we will have effective control of the space around the station in approximately 40 minutes. Reinforcements will arrive several hours after that. Then, we have time. Junho looked at the display. Keep flagging the retreating ships. I want everything tracked. Bora's vanguard had pushed completely through the Council's center by then. The blocking formation that had been scrambled together an hour earlier was now broken into isolated groups, each being handled by a dedicated pursuit element from the Earth fleet. Some Council captains were trying to fight. Most were trying to escape. A few had already gone completely silent, which was the tactical equivalent of putting your hands up. Rena called in from the unbroken dawn. We have control of the engagement zone. Council military presence in the cluster is at roughly 20% of initial strength. Their reserve positions are not moving. I think they've been ordered to defend the station perimeter only. What's the station doing? Still trying to reach us through every diplomatic channel they have. Counselor Dara has sent 7 separate requests for ceasefire dialogue. Junho said nothing for a moment. How long did Earth wait for the Council to respond to our formal complaints? He asked. Rina's voice was flat. 12 years. Average response time on a filed complaint was 4 months, with no guaranteed action. Tell Counselor Dara we'll respond to her ceasefire request in 4 months, Junho said. Mark it as received and file it. There was a brief pause, then Rina said, Yes, Admiral. But Junho had not finished. Kyung, he said, open a broadcast channel. All frequencies. Every system in range. Kyung looked up. All frequencies, Admiral? That would reach everything in range, Junho said again. Kyung set it up in 30 seconds. Channel is open. You're broadcasting to approximately 40 inhabited systems. Junho did not stand up from his chair. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the same way he always spoke, clearly, directly, without ornamentation. This is Admiral Junho of the Earth Allied Warfleet. What you are about to receive is a data package, compiled over 12 years by Earth's diplomatic archives. It contains every classified vote the Galactic Council took without notifying affected species. Every economic restriction applied without legal cause. Every territorial decision made in private chambers while public sessions were staged as theater. Every species that was told they were protected while documents were being signed to reduce them to managed wards. He paused. We are broadcasting these records in full. Not edited, not summarized. Everything. He looked at Kyung. Send it. Kyung pressed the transmit command. 40 systems received the data package at the speed of light. 40 systems whose people had been living under the Council's arrangements, some of whom had suspected something was wrong for years, but had no proof, no documentation, no numbers. Now they had all of it. Names, dates, vote counts, private communications, financial records, territorial agreements signed in secret. The battle outside was nearly over. But the thing Junho had just done would last considerably longer than any battle. Siwon pulled his scout ship back toward the fleet, his disruption work complete. He looked out his viewport at the scattered remnants of what had been the Council's defense formation. Ships drifting, ships retreating, ships sitting motionless with their weapons powered down. He opened a channel to Bora. Is it done? The fighting part, Bora said. The rest is just starting. He looked at the stars outside his viewport and thought that was probably true. Betrayed by the Council, Earth's war fleet emerged. Total annihilation unleashed. Part 5. The New Order, written in steel. The silence after a battle is a different kind of silence from any other. It is not peaceful. It is not restful. It is the silence of things that were in motion and are no longer, of energies that have been spent, of people catching their breath and trying to understand what the world looks like now that the noise has stopped. It sits in the corridors of ships, in the pauses between status reports, in the faces of crew members who are checking that the person next to them is still there. The EAWS Unyielding held its position at the center of the formation. Around it, the Earth fleet had spread into a wide containment pattern around Verath Station. Not a blockade meant to starve or suffocate, but a presence. A clear, unmistakable, 312-ship presence that communicated something beyond words. The station was not going anywhere. The Council was not going anywhere. And the Earth fleet was not leaving until certain things were settled. What remained of the Council's military ships had either retreated past the cluster's boundary or were holding position near the station with their weapons powered down. No one had fired anything in over 2 hours. The battle, by any practical definition, was finished. What remained was everything that happened after battles, which was, in Junho's experience, usually harder. He had agreed to meet with the Council delegates aboard the Unyielding. This was a deliberate choice. He could have gone to the station, could have sat in that same grand chamber where he had been given speeches about cooperation while partition documents were signed behind closed doors. There would have been a kind of symmetry to that, but he wanted the meeting here, in a place that was unambiguously Earth's, in a room that had not been designed for ceremony or impression management. The conference room off the Unyielding's main deck was functional and plain. A long table, chairs, lighting that was bright enough to see clearly, and nothing more. No floating decorations, no atmospheric mixing systems, no theatrical scale. Just a room where things could be said directly. Counselor Dara arrived with 4 other delegates, and a small security escort that Bora had quietly ensured could not bring weapons past the outer airlock. Dara looked different from the woman Junho had seen in the council chamber. She was still composed. She was too experienced a politician to come apart entirely. But the particular quality of her composure had changed. Before, her composure had been the relaxed certainty of someone who knew how the board was arranged and where every piece was. Now, it was the careful, effortful composure of someone holding themselves together through discipline alone. She sat across from Juno. No smiles this time. The other delegates sat along the sides of the table, representatives from 3 of the species that had signed the partition agreement. One of them, a heavy, 4-armed being from the Keth Confederation, named something that translated roughly as Honored Senior Delegate Varus, had not been able to look directly at Junho since entering the room. The data broadcast had reached the Keth home system 4 hours ago. From what Ki-Young had picked up in open communications since then, the Keth government was already dealing with a very serious public reaction to what their citizens had just learned about what their council representatives had been doing. Every species in range was dealing with that same conversation. Junho placed a single document on the table. It was printed on actual paper, which was unusual enough that Dara glanced at it with something close to surprise. He had printed it on paper because paper could not be edited after the fact. Paper was a statement that what was written on it was fixed. The new Verath terms, he said. I'll walk through the main points, and then I'll answer questions if there are any. He did not wait for permission to begin. Earth's outer colonies were to be recognized as fully sovereign territories under a new galactic framework. Not under council management, not under anyone's protection, but sovereign. Full members of any governance system that was built going forward. The existing Verath Accord was dissolved in its entirety. A new framework would be negotiated with full representation from all species, including every species that had been classified as a secondary or protected member under the old system. Those classifications were abolished immediately. Earth would be maintaining its full military presence in the Verath cluster until the new framework was ratified. The Ghost Yards, Junho said the name plainly, watched the delegates absorb the confirmation that yes, all of this had been planned and built, would remain active and fully staffed. Earth was not disarming again, not because it intended to wage war, but because it had learned what happened when it trusted goodwill over capacity. The Council's existing leadership structure was to be suspended. An interim administration would manage basic galactic services, trade route coordination, emergency communications, medical supply chains, while a new governance system was built. The interim administration would be supervised by a joint committee of species, none of whom had signed the partition agreement. Finally, the full archive of classified council actions would remain publicly accessible. It would be maintained by an independent organization with no ties to any current council member. It would never be sealed, redacted, or classified again. Dara read through the document carefully. The room was quiet. This removes the council entirely, she said. The council removed itself, Junho replied. When you signed the partition agreement, you ended the institution that agreement was supposed to represent. You can't claim legitimacy from the Verath Accord and simultaneously destroy it in a private session. There are 40 inhabited systems that depend on the current structure for basic services, which is why we are not removing those services. We are removing the political arrangement that was using those services as leverage. He looked at her directly. The Keth need council-managed trade routes, the same way they need a contract that secretly removes their territorial rights. They just need the trade routes. Varys shifted in his seat, but said nothing. The conversation went on for 3 hours. Dara pushed back on several points, as Junho had expected. She was good at finding the specific wording that might create room for interpretation, might leave small doors open for future maneuvering. Each time, Junho closed the door. He had brought Rena into the meeting via communication link, and Rena had spent years reading council legal language. She caught every attempt before it could be planted. By the end of the 3rd hour, the document had not changed in any significant way. The delegates signed, not happily, not with the ease of people who felt they had a choice, but they signed. While the meeting was happening, Rena had been managing the fleet's repositioning. Earth ships were taking up positions at 7 key transit points across the cluster, not to block movement, but to establish presence. To make it clear that these coordinates were now part of humanity's operational space. The rest of the fleet would rotate in and out over the coming months as the new governance framework was built, ensuring that the paper that had just been signed in a plain room on a human warship stayed real. Taesu was already reviewing plans for 3 permanent Earth command stations, to be built openly, on the record, no hiding required. He had a list of materials he needed, and a timeline that he felt was honestly quite reasonable, given the scope of the project. Hana was running post-battle maintenance on the torpedo systems, with the calm, methodical attention she gave to everything. She had been asked once what it felt like to fire a weapon that made things simply stop existing. She had thought about the question for a while, and then said, "About the same as anything else, honestly. You do the job. You make sure it's the right job. Then you do the maintenance." Siwon sat in the small break room behind the scout wing hangar, and ate a meal he had not had time to eat 6 hours earlier. It was cold. He ate it anyway. Bora found him there afterward, leaning against the wall with an empty tray in his hands, looking at nothing in particular. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Strange. Fine." She sat down across from him. They were both quiet for a minute.